Detroit moves differently in November. The cold comes off the water and settles into the city without drama. Quietly, persistently, the kind of cold that finds you even inside. On the second floor of the Brewster Community Arts Center, a building that smelled of industrial cleaner and 40 years of old wood, Joyce Watkins was arranging 8 small folding chairs into a semicircle. It was a Tuesday afternoon in November 1971. Joyce was 26 years old, 2 years out of Wayne State's music education program, in her second semester teaching vocal basics to children aged 8 through 11. She had a degree on her apartment wall and a used upright piano she'd been meaning to get tuned for 3 months. She was good with the kids, patient. Her approach was methodical, posture first, then breath, then tone. Today's lesson was breath support, which is the foundation of everything in vocal music and also one of the hardest things to explain to a 9-year-old who would rather be outside. She'd chosen This Little Light of Mine, simple, familiar, and, more importantly, a song where the difference between technically correct singing and actually real singing was something children could hear. For 40 minutes, she'd been trying to get her 8 students to open their voices, to stop singing small and careful, to let the sound come from somewhere genuine. She demonstrated every few minutes. Her voice was trained, clean, technically sound, but she could tell, even as she sang, that something wasn't landing. The kids were copying the shape of the sound without finding what was inside it. They sang like children performing for a test rather than making music. She heard the gap. She just couldn't close it. Then the door opened. A man slipped in quietly, the way people do when they're late but don't want to make a thing of it. He was somewhere in his early 30s, wearing a dark turtleneck and a worn baseball cap pulled low. He looked like he'd just come in from the cold. He nodded briefly at Joyce, apologetic, polite, and moved to the folding chairs along the back wall. She assumed he was a parent. She gestured to the empty chairs and he sat down without making anything of it. For the next 20 minutes, she kept teaching. The man in the back didn't check his watch. He watched the kids with what Joyce gradually noticed was genuine attention. Not the half-present patience of parents doing a duty, but the focused kind that means someone is actually thinking about what they're seeing. Once, when a boy named Marcus kept dropping his chin and losing the note, the man shifted slightly in his seat, like he wanted to say something. He didn't. Joyce tried 3 different angles on breath support: the anatomy approach, diaphragm, rib cage, the mechanics. The image approach: think of your voice as a beam of light, don't let it dip. The physical approach: hands on stomachs, feel the movement. Each landed partially. None of it quite clicked. She looked toward the back of the room. The man caught her eye, just briefly. There was something in his expression she couldn't quite name. Not boredom, not impatience. Something almost like recognition, like he knew exactly what she was trying to do and understood why it wasn't working yet. She had an idea. It wasn't in the lesson plan. "Excuse me," she said. "I'm sorry to interrupt your wait. Would you be willing to help me for a second? I need an adult voice for a demonstration. It helps the kids hear what breath support actually sounds like. Just one phrase." The man looked at her, 1 beat longer than expected. Not strangely, just with that quiet expression again. "You sure about that?" he said. His voice was low, the kind that doesn't need to raise itself to be heard. "Completely," Joyce said. "Just follow the phrase I've been using. This little light of mine. That's all." "All right," he said. He stood from the small folding chair and walked to the front of the room, stopped beside the upright piano, looked at the 8 children looking up at him the way kids look at adults who've wandered into their space. Curious, but not particularly impressed. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't explain anything at all. Joyce played the opening phrase on the piano. He opened his mouth. What came out was the same phrase she'd been teaching for 40 minutes. Same words, same notes, same key. It was not the same at all. The sound that came out of the man in the baseball cap was not a demonstration. It wasn't a performance. It was simply a voice doing what that voice had been built to do, and the effect in the room was immediate and physical. 3 kids in the front row went completely still. The boy by the radiator, Darnell, Calvin's son, quietly restless all class, stopped moving entirely. His shoes paused mid-swing. The room didn't go quiet the way it does when something loud happens. It went quiet the way it does when something true happens. The grain of it, the warmth that rose from somewhere below the ordinary register of sound. The note didn't arrive so much as appear, like it had been waiting there the whole time, and the voice had simply removed what was covering it. Joyce's hands were still on the piano keys. She knew that voice. She knew it from a May afternoon 6 months ago, standing in a record store on Woodward Avenue, hearing the opening of What's Going On through the shop speakers, and buying the album before the first song even finished. She'd listened to that record 50 times. She knew every phrase on it. No, she was in the Brewster Community Arts Center, a man in a baseball cap who had agreed to sing one phrase. He finished, let the note settle, looked at her. Your turn, he said to the kids. A girl named Keisha raised her hand. He sounds like the man on my mama's records. Nobody spoke for a moment. Which man? Another kid asked. The one Mama dances to, with the songs about the world. The man glanced down at Keisha, and something moved across his face, just briefly. Not quite a smile, something quieter than that. You want to try it? He said. And then, without any ceremony, without any announcement of who he was, Marvin Gaye sat down on the floor. Not in a chair. On the floor, cross-legged, at eye level with the children, in his dark turtleneck and worn cap, in this underlit room in Brewster in November 1971. 6 months after What's Going On had changed what soul music was allowed to say, he sat down, and the kids shuffled into a loose circle around him, the way children always do when an adult suddenly makes themselves the same size. Nobody in that room knew the weight of what had just sat down among them. What Miss Joyce has been teaching you is right, Marvin said. Every word of it. Posture, breath, support. Don't forget any of that. He paused. But I want to show you something she's also been teaching you that maybe you haven't quite heard yet. He sang the phrase again, just the first line, then stopped. Hear that? He waited a second. Now I'm going to do it differently. He sang it again. Same notes, same words, same key, but this time something in it was closed. Technically correct in every way Joyce had been teaching, and somehow, compared to the first time, hollow. Like a room with the furniture arranged correctly, but no one actually living in it. The kids heard the difference. You could see it on their faces. Same notes, Marvin said. Same breath. Different thing inside it. He looked around the circle. Miss Joyce has been telling you to let the sound out. She's right, but there's a step before that. You have to know what you're letting out. A pause. The breath isn't something you push into the note. It's something you let carry what you feel. Your body knows the difference even when your brain doesn't. He looked at Darnell, Calvin's boy, sitting closest to him. You've been real quiet today, Marvin said. Not an accusation, just something he'd noticed. Darnell shrugged one shoulder. You scared of your own voice? Another shrug. Most people are, Marvin said. Doesn't mean they have to stay that way. He nodded toward the piano. Miss Joyce, one more time. Joyce played the phrase. Her hands were steady. The rest of her was not. Marvin looked at Darnell. Don't try to sound good. Just tell the truth. Darnell sang. It wasn't a trained voice. It wasn't remarkable. It was a 9-year-old boy still finding his edges. But it was open, round. Something in it unlocked that hadn't been there 20 minutes ago. And the room heard it the same way the room had heard the difference when Marvin sang. Darnell looked up, genuinely surprised by the sound that had just come out of his own body. That's it, Marvin said quietly. That's exactly it. Joyce was standing behind the piano. She had been teaching children to use their voices for 2 semesters. She had, that very morning on the bus, listened to Holy Holy on the small cassette player she kept in her bag. Marvin Gaye's voice filling her left ear as the city moved past the window. She had done all of that. And now she was watching Marvin Gaye sit on this floor and show a 9-year-old boy the inside of a note. Parents arrived at 4:15. The room broke into the small chaos of a class ending. Marvin helped Darnell find his jacket, which had ended up under someone else's chair somehow. When the room was mostly empty, Joyce walked over. Mr. Gaye. She couldn't find anything to put after it. "Just here for Darnell," he said. "I told you to demonstrate a breathing exercise." She stopped. "You've been sitting in the back of my children's vocal class for 30 minutes, and I asked you to help with a breathing demonstration." "You needed an example," he said, not unkind. "I gave you one. I have your album. I listened to it this morning." "How is it?" he asked. She looked at him. "How is it?" "I'm asking seriously." "It's the most important thing I've heard in years," she said. "I've listened to it probably 50 times." "Then you already know everything I showed them today?" He picked up Darnell's bag from the floor and handed it to the boy. "You were trying to teach them what you hear in that music. You just needed them to hear it too." Joyce stood there for a moment. "The way you described the breath, not pushing, letting go. I've been saying essentially the same thing, but—" "You were saying it right," Marvin said. "Same lesson needs 5 different doors sometimes. You had 4 of them. I handed you one more." He looked at her. "You're teaching them well. Don't doubt that part." She didn't know what to do with that. "Darnell's in class for a few more weeks." "Should be." "If you ever felt like sitting in again—" She stopped herself. "I know that's a strange thing to ask." He looked at her for a moment. Then, "Same time next Tuesday?" Darnell tugged on his sleeve. "Can we stop and eat?" "We'll see," Marvin said. He looked at Joyce once more. "Don't let the lesson plan get in the way of the music." They left. The door swung shut, and the room went quiet. Joyce stood alone where, 20 minutes ago, Marvin Gaye had sat cross-legged on the linoleum and shown 8 children that the distance between a correct note and a true one is not a matter of technique. She moved to the piano, sat down, put her hands on the keys and played the phrase one more time. "This little light of mine." She heard what she'd been doing right all along. She heard what had been sealed inside it. And then, like a door quietly unlatched from the other side, she heard herself open it. The note came out of her differently than it ever had before. She stayed at the piano for a long time after that. Have you ever had someone show you how to do something you already thought you knew, and realize in 1 second that you'd been missing the whole point? Tell us in the comments.